Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Two pairs of Chinese and Russian bombers were intercepted flying off the coast of Alaska on July 24th. You can see here a Russian bomber readying to take off in footage released by the Kremlin, and here a Chinese bomber taking off. It was the first time a joint Chinese and Russian patrol made an incursion into the US's air defense identification zone. You can also see here US and Canadian fighter jets escorting the bombers in mid-air. Given both types of bombers were nuclear capable, does it show a willingness of the two partners to extend cooperation to their nuclear forces? What message are they sending by pressuring the US homeland? And is this an escalation of the two partners working together to test US resolve? Joining us to discuss this are Tiehlin Yen, Taipei School of Economics and Political Science Center for Peace and Security Project Manager, and Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan, Mongolia, and Guermantes Lailari, visiting researcher at the Institute of National Defense and Security Research and retired US Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in irregular warfare and missile defense. A very warm welcome to all of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Although China and Russia have conducted 8 joint bomber flights since 2019, this is the first joint patrol near Alaska and in the northern Pacific. Previous bomber flights were conducted in the Sea of Japan, East China Sea and Western Pacific, with some flying through the ADIZ of Japan and South Korea. It is also the first time that Chinese aircraft have flown close to Alaska. Let's take a look at the route the two Chinese and two Russian bombers took the night of July 24th. We can see that they come up between far eastern Russia and the US state of Alaska, coming within 200 miles of its coast. They didn't venture into US sovereign airspace, staying instead within Alaska's ADIZ, which is airspace controlled by the US for national security reasons, where aircraft are required to identify themselves. Professor Yen, let me come to you first. So what message do you think Beijing and Moscow were sending by this flight?
I think, first of all, that they're showing to the U.S. and to the world that they cooperate with each other very closely. Secondly, because it's nuclear-capable bombers, so they're trying to send a signal that they, especially Beijing, they are nuclear-capable. They have a power projection capability.
But if these bombers, which were nuclear capable, but we do not think that they were actually carrying nuclear weapons at the time.
So that's the question. So that's a very tricky one, because just like a missile being fired, you don't know it's a nuclear warhead on the tip of the missiles or conventional one. Bomber as well. Was
it clear to you that if there had been nuclear weapons, that the US could have defended them?
Oh, certainly. The air defense capability, once you got intercept, certainly they can be shot down. But consider in the last 10 years, US B-52, B-1 or B-2 go to South China Sea or East China Sea several times. So it's kind of a response saying, you can come to my territory, I can come to your territory as well.
So Tony, do you also agree that it's we can do what you can do, and also it's actually in response to what's been happening in the South China Sea?
I think so, because Russians have been doing this by themselves for quite a long time. This time it's significant because the PRC bomber came along. The fact is PRC bomber doesn't have the range. It would be a one-way mission if they ever decided to attack Alaska or California. But the real significant part, I believe, is the demonstration of interoperability, because not only the bombers were operated together, the Russian airborne warning and control aircraft A-50 and the Chinese KJ-500 were both operational during their flight to maintain monitoring and communications. So this is a significant capability when you look at the fact that somehow those airborne warning and control aircraft was able to communicate and monitor aircraft from both countries. Although U.S. did have a E-3, our own AWACS up there monitoring the flight.
Again, and what does that elevated level of interoperability, what does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, as the two previous speakers noted, the first thing I would point out is the PLA Air Force deployed to a Russian Air Force base. That's the first time with a bomber. So they jointly took off from that base together. That's why Tony mentioned that the H-6 doesn't get that far without assistance. But to me, the more important thing is that China has only about 10 bombers of that type that can carry nuclear weapons. So to me, it's more about them training their bomber fleet on how to do this too. That's like 20% of their fleet. And then this could be an area for expansion. In other words, right now, this could be another area besides the ground-based missiles where they can start increasing their aircraft. And then finally, it was interesting to me is that China flew with the Russian bombers with their fighter aircraft accompanying them as well to the Arctic area. And China has been trying to claim that area. So it's also a demonstration of territoriality. In other words, Russia and China working together to sort of demonstrate that they have control or some kind of an occupation concept over the Arctic. So those are the kind of things I worry about.
If we can talk about the incursions from the light of Taiwan. Now, obviously, Beijing has a strategy, a gray zone, so-called gray zone warfare strategy, where it attempts to wear down the resources of Taiwan's Air Force by having these almost daily incursions. If the same were to happen for the US, what do you think their strategy should be?
Because this type of projection obviously is already happening around Taiwan. And while U.S. and Canada has the resources to go up and meet them, but the fact is, what you want to do is make sure you let them know that they're being monitored. For Taiwan scenario, Taiwan is resource limited, so it would not be smart for Taiwan to match that kind of intrusion every time launching aircraft and stuff. So you just have to demonstrate that you have ability to monitor and warn them. A ground-based radar. To provide the type of radar warning on those aircrafts, they have indications when they get the radar is monitoring them, a search warning, or even when they have single target track or a tracking warning. So all you need to do is let these aircraft and ship know that they'll be monitored. And I think Taiwan should use this type of asymmetric approach, and Taiwan should remain unpredictable. Sometimes you go up to intercept, sometimes you only have the radar lock on. So I think that's what Taiwan should consider.
Okay. Now, China, Russia, and the US are the most powerful nuclear-armed states. According to 2024 estimates by the Federation of American Scientists, the US has 3,608 deployed and non-deployed nuclear assets, while Russia has 4,380. China has 500 non-deployed nuclear warheads. However, the Federation of American Scientists estimates that Russia and China are increasing their stockpiles, whereas the US is dismantling its. An assessment by the Pentagon says that China is on track to amass 1,000 by 2030, up from 200 in 2019. That's a 500% increase over 10 years. Since 2020, indeed, China has more than doubled its inventory. G-Man, let me come to you. So what do you think is behind China's rapid buildup?
The bottom line is China is wanting to be a nuclear superpower like Russia and the United States. And so they intend to have at least the same number of nuclear warheads pointed at their adversaries.
So is it just about great power status?
That's the first part. Second part is that China experienced what it's like not to have nuclear weapons in the 1950s, in the first and second Taiwan crisis. And so they don't want to ever be in a position again where, let's say, the US would threaten them with nuclear war while they're trying to take Taiwan, let's say, the South Sea arena. So this is a future plan so that in the future they will not be deterred if they choose to do something. And I think they're trying to use an ironic argument of saying, oh, well, the US is doing this so we could do it. I mean, the main reason, first of all, the U.S. is not increasing its nuclear weapons because Russia and the U.S. have an agreement about the number of nuclear weapons, so that there's a stability between those two countries. Any country could use the same argument. North Korea could say, oh, we're not the same as the U.S., so we should also have 1,500 deployed missiles, and every other country around the world could do the same thing. No, this is about China's plan to expand. That's my opinion.
Professor Yen, just to bring in the Chinese viewpoint, so Tong Zhao, who's actually from Carnegie's China division, says that for Xi Jinping, so it's actually under Xi Jinping that there's been this massive build-up. His fundamental belief is that nuclear weapons are a strategic counterbalance, essentially to the US's power, and that really he's just using nuclear to compel the US to respect China more and to accommodate China's rise.
To some extent, I agree with this kind of thinking. Yet I think the deeper root cause would be, you see in the last 30, 40, ever since 1964, when they explode the first nuclear test, they maintain a very minimum nuclear force and take no first use as a nuclear doctrine and what they call the minimum deterrence strategy, which means they will absorb the first nuclear strike, then retaliate. They consider they have to change the minimum strategy, trying to modeling the United States, conducting something more aggressive strategy called limited response means they can conduct launch unwarning strategy. Means when I perceive there is a incoming nuclear attack, I can launch my silo-based nuclear weapon, which is ICBM. But they forgot one thing. One thing is the U.S. signed a treaty with Russia, so both sides has a strategic stability there. Then you come up with another role, which is with the same nuclear warheads. That means United States has to face two nuclear power, with a parity to the U.S. So that will make the United States feel inferior. That's why I think U.S. is so desperate, want to have nuclear dialogue with Beijing.
Tony, on nuclear parity, but that's not something that China has explicitly said.
Right. I think what China wants to do is just so that they can demonstrate a nuclear deterrence. So deterrence, what does it mean? That means you have to have the ability to survive in a first strike nuclear attack and be able to execute a retaliatory second strike. So,
which is what Professor Yen just said.
Right, the survival. So basically survival, you have dispersion, okay? Like you put your silo separate very far away, or you have the mobile launchers and you have concealment like submarines. US primary nuclear weapons are in our submarines and also hardening to make sure you can survive a nuclear strike. So for dispersion, for example, United States, our silos and command centers are at least 20 kilometers away. So,
and we've got a diagram, I think, that
we can talk about that. For the 509th Missile Squadron, for example, in Wyman Air Force Base, which is deactivated now, we just use that as example, where the alternate command center is 144 kilometers away. And that squadron covers an area of almost 13,000 square kilometers with only 50 launchers, okay? That's survivable, all right? China, on the other hand, they have a lot of, their Dongfeng 41, Dongfeng 31, it's all mobile launchers, so they can disperse, but those are soft targets, okay? Even if they get away from the initial blast, but the electromagnetic wave, EMP, that come from the nuclear blast will ruin this command and control system because they're mobile, they have to count on radio waves for receiving command instructions. At that point, they would not be able to receive the radio waves. So I think China realized that. So that's why China is building a lot of missile silos in Xinjiang. For example, in Hami, Xinjiang, China is building 110 silos in an area just over 1,000 kilometers square. That is like 12 times smaller than the area just the 559 Squadron. And
so why not disperse them, though, Tony? Why not make them more survivable?
Because if you tie together, it's easier for maintenance, for command and control, and then everything. It also, I believe, is a demonstration of China's new nuclear policy. Because they're not survivable in a second strike. under first strike. So they cannot execute a second strike because in that 1,000 or so square kilometer of 110 silos, I calculated with the minimum 3 W-78 nuclear warhead in an airburst scenario, it only takes 3 to 4 warheads to knock the entire field out. Therefore, like TL just said, Professor Yen just said, when you have your nuclear weapon, you have to consider if under the first strike, everything's going to be dead, so you launch a warning. It's all or nothing. So therefore, you might not have a limited strike option. You either launch everything on warning, or you might not be able to launch at all. So it makes people think about, China said no first use, NFU. Are they really able to execute that policy? Because if their missiles can't survive under the first striking environment, they're going to do first strike. And the rest of the world should look out for that because just by the layout, I only talk about Jaime Field. They actually building 3 fields right now, and they're all densely packed, and they're all not survivable under first strike. So you must consider their action versus their verbal expression of their nuclear policy.
Yeah, so their words versus their actions and whether these actually tally up. Guermantes, do you agree with that assessment that essentially what we're looking at is not a second strike, but a first strike?
Yes, and I think also that the Beijing also wants to diminish our ability to disperse our nuclear weapons around the world, and that's why they don't like the fact that we have nuclear weapons in Europe. We have a nuclear umbrella with Japan and South Korea. These are all things that make them nervous because they don't know where the nuclear weapons are going to be fired from. So therefore, their first strike will not be effective if they launch against the US. The other part that was mentioned previously is also our submarine fleet contains most of our nuclear weapons. And so they have to find those. And if they can't find them, then their first strike is going to be a mistake. That's why I said in the beginning that they're actually, in my opinion, what we see right now is only the first step. The next step is they're going to build their bomber fleet and they're going to build the submarine fleet so that therefore, if they choose to do a first strike, they have the additional ability to strike from those three total triad. Right now, there really is only one triad. One part of the triad is fully functional, is they're land-based.
Right, okay, so the triad of sea, air, and land. Yeah, okay. Professor Yen.
Yes.
So interestingly, we're talking about no first use, but Beijing has called on the US to adopt a no first use, saying that China is the only one of the P5, the 5 Security Council members in the UN that has adopted it, and it's calling on the US to do the same thing. What do you think is behind this?
I think they fail to understand what's a US philosophy on deterrence. US is reserved to launch first. The first use strategy basically is a US ideology for deterrence. So deterrence based on US has an intention to use nuclear weapon first.
Guermantes, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think actually this is the deception plan that China is using to deflect the fact that they're building their nuclear forces. They want to put the psychological warfare and the media warfare and legal warfare onto the US to make the US defend its policy, while at the same time as they're building up their nuclear forces. So they want to change the narrative from why are you building more nuclear weapons to why don't you have no first use? That is my explanation of what's going on.
So for our viewers who may not be all that familiar with it, does it not sound reasonable to have a no first use policy?
That's the point. It sounds reasonable, but in actuality, they're building up a first strike and a second strike capability while they're talking to the U.S. saying you should have a no first use. But the point of having a flexible response capability is that your adversary doesn't know what you're going to do, and that deters them from taking any action. That's the key. If you say no first use, that means you're telegraphing your adversary, you can attack me, I won't attack you first, but if you attack me, I will attack you afterwards. So it puts you at a disadvantage. So I think it's wrong-minded it sounds good, but it's not good.
So nuclear deterrence is the only real deterrence, is what you're saying. And without that, it invites an overwhelming response, whether it's chemical, biological, or conventional. Tony, Beijing also called the nuclear umbrella, the US's nuclear umbrella. They said that it violates the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. How does it do that?
Of course, it's ridiculous because nuclear non-proliferation treaty says that nuclear states should not transfer nuclear material technology to non-nuclear states. And obviously, U.S. Nuclear defense umbrella has nothing to do with that. We don't actually transfer any of those things. And China, on the other hand, it is a signatory to NPT, but they have transferred nuclear technology and material to Pakistan, to Iran, to North Korea. So that's why it's so important for people to understand, like, China is pushing for no first use and try to make themselves look like a good guy, that everybody else should be matching their desire to do so. The fact is, I don't believe that they believed in for no first use. I truly believe if they seize a need, they will use it first.
I'll come to Professor Yen first. So in March 2024, the US and China, they resumed nuclear talks at sort of the lower level, not non-governmental level, first time in 5 years, only for a few months after that for China to withdraw, citing essentially US arms sales to Taiwan. Can you tell us why it's important for China to participate? I mean, it's not interested in dialogue.
Yeah, that's for the global strategic stability interest for everybody. Because I mentioned U.S. now is considered the expansion of the Chinese nuclear arsenal is a very unstable thing. It's not a good thing to the global strategic stability. So that's why it's imperative to engage with Beijing on this dialogue, to understand their future intention, to understand their nuclear force development, to understand.
But China has been opaque. It does not wish to.
Yeah, that's what we, we mentioned that they take all those tactics to try to delay, try to avoid this dialogue, and simply try to expand their force level to the level to be in par with U.S. or Russia one.
Yeah. But because this is strategic rivalry, that's the Chinese side of things, isn't it? So it considers itself as at a disadvantage. It doesn't want to be at that disadvantage, Guermantes.
But why stop at 1,500? I mean, there's nothing that stops them.
Exactly.
The U.S. and Russia have agreed to stop there. So 1,500 is a goal that they're trying to say, well, we're trying to get even. And then once they get even, just like we saw when their military build up, now they have more ships than the U.S. Navy. They have more aircraft. They have everything more. So, it's just a stepping stone in their argument to build their power and project it and to take actions around the world. The final thing is, don't forget, Russia is also a signatory of NPT and all the other agreements, and they threatened the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So what difference, so what assurance do we have that China is not going to do the same thing when they start doing something against Taiwan? They could use the same technique to keep out the forces to support Taiwan. So the whole logic they're using is very deceptive, and they're trying to use legal warfare and psychological operations to confuse people about what's going on. Okay. Bottom line is they're expanding.
Right. Talking about Taiwan, Tony, so in the June meeting of these nuclear talks, 2 U.S. officials said that the Chinese side, when asked would they resort to using nuclear weapons over Taiwan, they said, no, we would not, because we are capable of taking Taiwan through conventional means. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, they will not use a nuclear weapon against Taiwan because the damage to themselves, such as fallout through the Taiwan Strait, the cities around the coastal of China and the fishing industry will be devastated. So no, but they might use nuclear weapon to threaten friendly forces from approaching Taiwan, like trading Taipei for LA. They have said that. Of course, the United States will respond, say, you willing to trade Beijing for LA or the entire China? Because if China decides to use nuclear weapon, they can fully expect a full nuclear response. So no, I don't believe they'll use a nuclear weapon against Taiwan. Plus, the party chairman who used a nuclear weapon to kill millions of Chinese people that they call compatriots will not survive.
Okay. Guermantes, I know you have an opposing view on this.
Well, actually, it's a complementary view to Tony. Recall that these two officials are not officials. They're actually from the Pacific Forum. It's a think tank, and they're not officials. And so what they were repeating is propaganda given to them to say to newspapers that China won't use nuclear weapons. But what's the subtle part is they were absolutely convinced that they were able to prevail in a conventional fight over Taiwan without using, in other words, prevail against Taiwan. Like you mentioned, doesn't say anything about the U.S. And the final thing is, the U.S. Pentagon says that China would also consider nuclear use to restore deterrence if a conventional military defeat in Taiwan. In other words, if they were losing, they would use nuclear weapons, according to the Pentagon.
Or threaten to use.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So the distinction between they wouldn't use it to win, but if they were losing, that's when they would introduce.
Yeah, they could.
Right. They will use that to prevent attack on Chinese mainland.
And prevent a loss.
Right.
Yeah, once they lost, the legitimacy of the Beijing regime will be facing very serious problem, and then their leadership will be questioned.
Absolutely. And also, all the one China policies around the world would be defunct.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to end it there. Thank you so much, Tiehlin Yen, Tony Hu, and Guermantes Lailari for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.